Om Shanti, and welcome to Interview with the Raj Yogi. Our topic today is continuing with the theme, exploring how to preserve self-integrity, integrity of the self, without boundaries, without having to impose boundaries. As usual, we'll start with a reflection. In one thought, I turn inwards. My attention turns 180 degrees from looking outwards, becoming engaged, even entangled with the scenes and situations outside. I turn inwards, becoming absorbed and the observer of my inner world, my thoughts, my feelings. There are layers to my inner world. There's the surface and there are the depths. On the surface there are my thoughts. Those are easy to observe. And so often I think that the thoughts are a result of what's going on outside. But when I look more carefully, honestly and clearly, my thoughts are shaped and informed by what's happening in the depths, by my attitudes, my perspectives, my beliefs, and by my consciousness, my awareness. This is where my thoughts are born. And every thought leads to an experience. If I want experiences of peace, of lightness, of happiness, of kindness, I don't need to look at rearranging the outer world. The fear that the outer world is blocking these experiences. I look in the depths of my inner world, and what needs to be adjusted there. So my thoughts are transformed, and my experiences aligned with my highest potential. Om Shanti.
Om Shanti. Welcome to Interview the Raj Yogi. First of all, we just want to check in with the audio for those who are on YouTube as well as those on Instagram. If you could let us know if it is okay. Just give you a couple of moments just to let us know through the chat box. sounds like it's okay because we don't see anything out there. So just let us know. So we continue with this topic of self-integrity, preserving self-integrity without boundaries. And there was something that you had mentioned last week, near the beginning of the last week's session, that the concern really about this aspect of boundaries is that there might be a lot of things we're glazing over. But, and I remember sharing at one point in time when I'd taken the course that souls really don't feel like they have an option when it comes to how they manage things in their life. It feels like as if it's either you join what everything is, whatever is going on, or you just sort of lock yourself out of it, and there is no third option. And that this study is really about a third option. So in terms of this aspect of that, this putting up these boundaries may actually be because we're glazing over some other things that are happening. What are your thoughts in terms of souls who do share where I need to put boundaries because I don't want to get hurt, and so I don't have a choice?
I think it's so understandable, and it's really sort of this idea, because this is about healing, and with healing we don't want to keep re-injuring, so instinct is to put up boundaries. But when we're healing something quite systemic or deep-rooted, there's what's called acute care, and then there is that long-term care or sustainable. So at first, acute, right? We want to immediately alleviate the pain. This is what happens medically. There's acute intervention. But we know that that is just for the short term. That's to address the immediate situation. The problem will come back. Acute care does not solve the problem. It just addresses the immediate situation. So the sort of idea that we often share around this is if someone's having a heart attack, there's immediate response. That is not the time to say, you really need to exercise more and change your diet. No, you need to give, but we know that they will have another heart attack without long-term care, intervention, lifestyle changes. So that's the idea of glossing over. I can understand doing something in that immediate moment because it's very painful for the self, for the soul. But that hasn't actually solved the problem. It's addressed the acute pain in that moment. But if I really want to solve the problem, eventually I will have to look at what's going on inside. So the boundaries, an immediate solution. But in terms of long-term, like true healing, that the boundary isn't going to do that. That's going to have to be something that I look at inside.
So more about in terms of creating a sustainable solution.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in terms of things that we might be glossing over, that is connected to the next question I have, is in terms of what is really threatening one's self-integrity, and are these boundaries that we are creating, are they really protecting us, or maybe they are in the acute situation?
Yeah, no, the boundaries I really feel are for that acute situation, but it hasn't really rebuilt the integrity, healed what's happened inside. And so, spiritually speaking, what's happened is that we've lost power, we've disconnected from that inner wisdom, inner knowing. Really the spirituality, we often say we're sort of spiritually impoverished. So that self-respect isn't really there. So that's the issue that we want to develop. And of course, boundaries aren't part of that. So what happens with the boundaries, we're kind of protecting a weak state. And eventually we want to empower the self. And once empowered, then the boundaries wouldn't be necessary.
It's interesting you were mentioning that, because I remember this example. Maybe because you are in physical fitness, you might be able to shed more light on it in terms of the spiritual parallel. But I hear that sometimes certain muscles are weak. There are other muscles that are basically overprotecting or guarding, and it kind of feels like that's what these boundaries are really about.
To some degree, the metaphor holds. What happens is that there are subtle muscles, and also some muscles become weak or imbalanced. So the more dominant muscle will not really bully, but sort of take over. And that tends to bring us actually out of alignment, or intensify the imbalance. So as an example, and it's probably happened to many of us because we're in front of the computer a little bit more, and there's a certain posture that can tend to happen if we're not paying attention. And basically it has to do with the front or anterior of the body. It tends to become weak and shortened, so we start to get this kind of hunching. And the back is very weak, it's not activated at all. So we get this imbalance where it's very shortened in the front and weak in the back. And this is classic. So then we start to feel pain. And so the idea of, again, acute care or boundaries is we start to take medication rather than correcting the issue, which is going to require some wisdom, some time, some patience, the right method, developing power, correcting the imbalance. Rather than doing that, we just sort of take medication for the pain. And yeah, in the short term, it alleviates the pain, but the imbalance is still there. So yes, the dominant muscles might take over, or the imbalance might just increase, and we kind of diagnose it a little bit funny or superficially and address it in a very short-term way.
It's quite interesting what you're sharing, because sometimes we do perceive boundaries as being an act of strength, or an act of being assertive, and not necessarily see, again, the short-term implications, or the short-term effect of it.
It has been shared, if we look at countries or nations, the boundary is their defense system. So their entire defense program. And it has been shared so many times that billions of dollars go into a country's defense system, and it gives them that same sense of strength. But meanwhile, resources are being pulled from really the life of the country, the education or the healthcare, other areas are being neglected that really are the heart of the country. So that can happen nationally, and it can happen as individuals. So we see it as a strength. But when we look closer, there's actually incredible fear behind that boundary. We are defensive. So there's a lot of fear and we're actually attracting animosity the more we build up the boundaries or the defense system. So it has a kind of funny side effect, and it is a bit of an illusion or self-deception that I am strong. I'm actually quite afraid. And if I start building up the heart of the country, I have the inner resources to respond to whatever happens with dignity rather than defensiveness. So we're kind of pulling our resources from where they kind of need to go and putting them into something that's keeping us in a fearful and actually weak place.
When you were sharing about, say, it can actually create more animosity, I was really thinking about sometimes we don't even realize the impact of having boundaries. And I know you shared a little bit about that last week. And would you say that it's because of sort of maybe only seeing things on a superficial level and not being able to see what implications there are?
So often, yeah, when something happens, we have games like this now, different mind games where I find them interesting. You really need to have a overarching, a very broad perspective, because in these games you make a move and you're so focused on that little corner of the game you don't realize the repercussions that had on some other part of the board and what you've actually created. And that happens so much in spirituality. The term that we use is having a broad heart, having that really broad vision or understanding or perspective, really being able to see, if I do this over here, what the consequences or impact will be. And when we come to defense and boundaries, I think it's most powerful or meaningful or touching to us when we talk about the heart. Do we want defenses and walls around our heart, or do we want an open heart? And if I put these defenses and walls around my heart, what impact does that have in towards the rest of me? I recently had someone send me a message, something they had read. I can't remember it completely, but it was just a few emails. They're remote, a few emails back and forth, and very thought-provoking. They just sent out of the blue. They asked me my thoughts on a quote, and it was something along the lines of, when someone does something that is perceived as, say, cruel or unkind, I don't, what was it? I don't fight back or react back. They become nothing to me. Something along this line. And all I remember when I read the quote was that it seemed very strong and very deadening. And the person wrote and said, actually, no, when I find if someone does something mean or unjust, she says, that's exactly what I do. They become nothing to me. They become nothing. I was like, I said, the only thing I could think of, well, I guess we have to be so careful in our responses, because they seem to make sense in terms of what we're doing to that person, but we're not looking at what it's doing to our own heart. When we respond certain ways, defenses, etc., they seem like a good idea. They look like they should protect. But what, just like they're draining from education, what are they doing to my heart when I do this, when I shrink this way? What does it do to my heart? Is there another way to protect, or not protect so much as preserve the dignity and integrity of the self without having to cut off my heart or put walls or boundaries, shrink my, the heart, if you will? Is there another way?
It's interesting because it reminds me of sometimes I hear the responses, I don't really care what people think, which usually comes from a place where there is some hurt, and whether or not they really, really, really can feel that they don't care is another question. But I used to work with children with cancer, and I would say the burnout rate there was tremendously high, and so many of the nurses, the amount of time they would spend with these children, that it became quite common that many of them would say, I just don't want to get close to these kids anymore. I don't want to feel anything, because every time I even care, it just hurts.
So this really is the main thing that spirituality looks at, is we swing from one extreme to the other. So, okay, fine, I'm going to be open-hearted, and then something happens, like, no, I'm going to close my heart down again. So I'm swinging from, spirituality looks at that third option that we're kind of hunting for, that balance of, we want to care, we want to be caring. I don't think anyone would say they don't want to be. But how can that caring happen without the sorrow? Is that possible? Yes. Yes, it is possible. So this is really what I think, when souls say, I'm looking for a spiritual practice, what should I be looking for? Well, that's something that it should be able to provide, is an understanding, a method to achieve that balance of being what we call very loving, but also in an unconditional way, or we use the word detached, loving without the sorrow, right? So we try and avoid the sorrows, and we say, I'm not going to care, but we can't do that for long because we're built to care. So then we start to care, and then we feel the sorrow, and we kind of swing from one extreme to the other.
Do you feel, and I'm really glad you brought up the word detachment, because it was something I was thinking about. I know we've talked about many, many, many times, so souls just need to go to previous Raj Yogi interviews. This word detachment is, some souls find that they grapple with because it kind of feels like they're being disconnected. But let's just say we're not talking about the healthy form of detachment, but it's, which I have seen even, as I've mentioned, in medical contexts, health professionals use that word. It's about feeling very disconnected.
Mm-hmm.
Would that be a form of a boundary because there's no other choice?
Absolutely, yeah. To disconnect or cut off, I think that's definitely what we would call a boundary.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to what I truly can experience myself to be a soul, how is that connected to what self-integrity is? I know we brought this up, this aspect at the beginning of last week, but just because, or actually maybe earlier, because there seems to be a lot of different ideas of what integrity means.
So this is, I think, when this term detachment most makes sense when we look at it in terms of soul. So imagine visually there is yourself, and let's say the self is represented by a dot. So imagine there is the self, and then imagine hundreds of strings from that dot, from you to the outer world, to different people, to different roles, responsibilities, objects that you call your own possessions. So all these different strings, and what those strings are different ways that I have identified myself and gotten a sense of value. Hundreds and hundreds, thousands of strings. And so this is all, those strings are attachments. So I've invested so much, like they are my lifeline, my bloodline, these different strings. And so let's say that it's a string to a car, a possession, my car, and that somebody drives into my car by accident, and then I feel, there's a reaction, there's pain, I'm not going to trust people anymore, whatever the case. So these boundaries start to emerge to protect these strings, not the self, but these strings that I've used to identify the self. That's what the boundaries are trying to protect.
So it's not really protecting me.
No, it's not protecting me, and on top of that, I am not those different things, those strings. So there's a lot of illusions in all this. So when we say detachment, it means I'm removing the strings. I'm not removing myself from all those things. My sense of self is not defined by those different things. My sense of self has come back into the self. I am a soul, and I understand what it means to say I am a soul. I have qualities, capacities. So the experience of being a soul, it's odd to say I know, but my sense of self is coming back into the self. The strings are no longer necessary. So that's called detaching, removing the strings. So now I have a very healthy relationship with everything. I can interact with people, possessions, and not get lost. My sense of self is not lost. And then when they're threatened, there's no need for a boundary because it's not threatening me. Right? My sense of self is in myself. If any of those things change, it's not a threat to me because I'm no longer identified, have those strings to those things. So having a sense of self is giving me an experience of integrity. To say I am a soul is giving me a sense of integrity, because it's taking away all those different strings which are illusions and bringing my sense of self back into the self.
So it's interesting you're sharing that, removing those strings doesn't necessarily mean I remove my relationship
No.
or connection to them.
No.
But many find that it seems like how is that even possible?
Yeah, there's these two terms, we've talked about them before, samband and bandhan. Bandhan means bondage or strings, and samband means relationship. And this idea that we can own people is already an illusion. My this, my that, this, my whatever, different relationship. So we have what's called bandhan. We have bondages, really, because people will come and go. Roles will come and go. Everything comes and goes. Change, as they say, is the only predictable thing, the only constant. So I have to develop a sense of self that is compatible with change. It's insane to think change is not going to happen. It's insane to think that by tying tight enough strings I can keep everything the way I want. What I will do is put myself into incredible tension. So boundaries, attachments have a deep connection. It really is about, again, trying to control and keep everything exactly the way I want, which is insanity, because it's just not the way reality works. Everything's going to change. But what if I have a sense of self that's grounded in what does not change, eternal truths? Now I can comfortably move through change with a very stable anchor or foundation.
Now, this is sort of a kind of a layered question. And I'll ask the question, but I'll give a little bit of a clarification about it in terms of how do I then show that I still care? Right? And the reason why I ask that, because I know we could say, well, why do you want to show you care? But I was thinking about this, I'll try to keep it very short, but there was this young man who had shared this story that when he was, he had gotten himself in a neo-Nazi group when he was very young, and so there was a lot of just acts of violence, during that time. And even though in his heart he felt that this was wrong, eventually he pulled himself out of that, and from this world of just such strong, violent emotions, he sort of went underground into another group which was all about love, 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 love. And I was just catching the subtle feeling from what he was sharing was that it was just liberating to be able to feel these other feelings. So that's more about the reason I'm this aspect of caring. It's that it's actually quite suffocating to not feel and to be cold and disconnected and numb. So usually when I hear someone says, I want to be able to show I care, I don't necessarily, I feel something else underneath it. It's not necessary I'm trying to have an image, trying to make myself perceive like I'm good, but that I want to still be able to, have these feelings that should be natural.
I think, the human spirit was built to care. We talk about a heart. We were really, when we're healthy, we're extremely caring. And, when we talk about love, which is the highest, a very high expression of caring, we love the term unconditional love. So it's when we come into conditional love that things get painful or difficult. So again, back to the strings, back to the attachments, back to the expectations. But if it's unconditional love, which is true, pure, spiritual love, no problem. It can be extremely caring, and it's not going to require any defenses or fear of being hurt, or it's not possible. It's when we come into conditional love that we get disappointed.
So on this aspect of self-integrity, this experience of myself as a soul, how does that connect to having unconditional love?
I'm thinking a lot as you're asking these questions about the original students of the Brahma Kumaris. And really there were two things that they had happening that made them unconditionally loving, and really have witnessed so much that however souls responded to them, positively or negatively, they remained intact. That is, they weren't affected, and therefore were free to continue being loving. And without putting up boundaries. If boundaries become our response to being attacked, then we shut down the love. Mm-hmm. So what they did, the two things they focused on was the experience of being a soul, and so understanding that love is not a reaction. As long as I keep thinking love is a reaction, that if you do what I want, I will love you. Or if you're a blood relative of mine, I will love you. Or if you give me chocolates, I will love you. Again, conditional love. If I think love is a reaction rather than an innate quality of the soul, then I will definitely run into, I've got to put up boundaries because my expectations are disappointed. So going deeply into the experience of being a soul, they were able to experience our innate loving nature. That was the first thing they did. The second was they had an extremely profound relationship with God, who really gave them that power we talked about earlier, the power to maintain that loving nature no matter what. So these two elements of really experiencing their true nature and cultivating the power to maintain it, to preserve it in any situation unconditionally, that really was their secret. I mean, so many times, there's so many fascinating stories of, I always find it shocking when I hear that souls would come out and be very angry with them. Very critical of them. It's hard to imagine, but very critical. And, these stories of there might be a translator there, so someone witnessing, because they would themselves not share these stories, but the translator, might recollect sharing stories of they're translating for one of the senior students. Maybe someone's come who speaks English, different language. So they're translating, and, as a translator, they're supposed to just translate, not get involved. But, the soul would be very angry or critical or upset, and the translator would have to relay this message, and they'd sort of sneak in, why are you even listening to this soul? Because they're so, they're insulting you so much. And the senior would sort of say, just keep translating, just do your job. Just keep translating.
They're trying to play a different role.
I'm fine. And the translator was always shocked, like, why? Because the response was always so loving. Mm-hmm. And they say, why this person was being unreasonable? Since they needed someone to listen to them. They needed to be, like, they were so loving. They weren't affected. Their integrity was intact. They don't need that person to value them, to feel their own self-respect, that love. But they are able to value others, which is so often needed. So when we put up walls, we could be making the situation so much worse. I can't imagine, but what if one of the seniors who have so much influence, what if they did respond negatively? That soul would be so deeply hurt by that, so they're very loving because they go deeply into their true nature of being loving. And they also absorbed themselves in a loving being who filled that love with power.
It's interesting. I feel like the microphone wasn't on the whole time and no one mentioned it.
Oh, wow.
I don't know. Oh. Well, I'm assuming hopefully that souls are able to hear, but maybe all you do really need to hear is Judy. You don't need to hear the questions.
No, this is not...
But when you were sharing about the caring piece, then it helps to clarify then really that souls really want that caring to be coming from the inside out, not as a reaction again.
I don't, I think deep down, each of us on one side want to be unconditionally loving, and on the other side, we want to be loved for who we are, not for a superficial reason. So we don't want to be loved.
Apologies, you might be hearing a vibration from the very phone
We
that the
neglected,
Instagram account is
sorry.
going on.
We don't want to be loved, because of the color of our eyes or our height or who we know. We want to be loved for who we are deep inside. So on both sides, we want it to be quite deep and unconditional.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if you can, I think it's around the same aspect of, I think many can feel like, how is it possible to operate without boundaries? What, can you even think of even just a physical example? What I really like about the inner fitness sessions that we used to have on Saturdays, which are now taking place once a month with Soul Cafe, is the physical parallels, because it kind of helps to bring a sense of relevance. And can you think of of something similar in terms of this aspect, that's like when there's physical integrity, that it can function properly?
Yeah, there's an exercise that we do, the essence of it, and it holds quite well the metaphor. So the physical integrity we know is this idea of core stability, that you have a strong core. And when your core is strong, the stronger it is, you can be put in all sorts of different situations on unstable surfaces, and you're able to remain upright, right? So there's an exercise that we have souls do. It's on what we call the Bosu trainer. So it's a half dome. Imagine a full ball cut in half so it can lay flat on the floor, and you have this domed surface. And we have them do a side-lying plank. So they're lying on one side on the dome, so it's quite unstable, with their arms and legs off the ground. So they're just an arrow lying on this dome, if you can imagine that. And they will spend out, it depends on the core. They will say, well, I have to get my center of gravity just in the right place, or I'm going to fall over. So we spend so much time, I'm just watching while they figure out exactly where and finally I say, when you have a strong core, you really don't need to spend a lot of time trying to find that perfect center point. Your core will be able to make up for any, if you're not quite on center. So with physical fitness, the stronger the core, the better able one is to remain upright, aligned, even in very unstable circumstances. They don't say, well, this has to be just right, this has to be just this way, or I can't do it, I need to, I can't do it in this situation or that situation, I need to be on the right side of the room, or I need the lights a certain way. None of that will matter if you have a strong core, strong alignment. So
Great example.
So we also like in life, well, I need, boundaries. I need things to be a certain way if I'm going to be okay. But the stronger my core, my sense of self is, the less things have to be just right externally. So this is becoming less bound.
Well, we are running out of time. I have a few other questions, but
I see that.
we've asked most of them,
Okay.
but maybe we can sort of incorporate it into our next topic. I believe it really is a connection between this really healthy detachment, this healthy sense of self-integrity, and self-mastery, actually. I think it's very connected to these topics, because I think when we're talking about this aspect of being strong and boundaries, we've perceived that as being strong, but I don't know if there's really self-mastery in that. So again, we invite souls, if you have questions, comments, like if the microphone's not working, if you have topics you would like explored, you're welcome to always email us or type in the chat box. And so we'll just have a little reflection.
I go inside, very deep inside, to what we might call the heart of my inner world. And I imagine therein my actual heart. And I take a moment to reflect on two different scenarios. In one scenario, my heart, that is this incredibly loving capacity that I have, my heart is surrounded by walls and barriers and boundaries, wire, moat, all sorts of protections, so my heart does not get hurt. Nothing gets in, but also nothing goes out. And the second scenario, my heart is very strong and completely open. Nothing surrounding it, expressing itself fully. It is so powerful that even if arrows are shot at the heart has the power to transform those arrows into flowers, into beautiful expressions of love. An open, powerful heart can transform sorrow into understanding without ever putting up a wall. Om Shanti.
Om Shanti. Thank you for joining with us this evening. I guess Judy would want me to go and remind everyone, instead of asking her to, that we do have a workshop.
I can get
this. No. You stay here. We have a workshop this Sunday from 5 o'clock to 6:15. I believe it's Remembering the True Self. But I will pass it back to Judy of other sessions that are available.
Which might be a little easier for me because it's all the regular sessions we have. So this being one of them, interview with a Raj Yogi. And we also offer on Saturdays from 2 to 3 p.m. on the Zoom platform, but also streamed to this YouTube channel, Soul Cafe. So it's different formats on different weekends, sometimes an interview, sometimes storytelling, sometimes inner fitness that Nora referred to. So different formats on different Saturdays. We have drop-in meditation Tuesdays, Thursdays for 45 minutes, 6:45 to 7:30, and Sundays a full hour, 6:30 to 7:30. There are also Hindi-speaking courses coming up, the Raj Yoga course. So check our website for the information on how to register if you wish to consider that. And we always enjoy your feedback in terms of programming or any questions you have. We do offer the Raj Yoga course in English, so write if you want to consider that possibility. We do offer it one-on-one. So take care until next time. Om Shanti.